KINK.FM.
102. We'll take that.
102, yes.
Oh, how cool is that?
Hate to say that, but 102 will always mean to me cheap beer that they used to sell. It was popular here in Portland.
That's funny.
Yeah, and Brew 102 was the cheapest beer you could buy in the 1960s.
I'll be darned.
Yes.
Well, we've turned into a little bit different city now with our micro beers.
Yes, right.
Yeah, a little bit. So once again, we've got you tonight at Reed College. We've got you Saturday, and then you're doing something. Is Reed College a part of your tour every year? Because I see your...
I come here every year.
Right.
The students are good enough to bring me in to do some talks during their independent study period, as they call it. Yeah. And I enjoy finding out what the current students are up to.
Right. Keeps you
Always
fresh
enjoy
with what's
that.
going on.
Yes.
Also talk to me, because you are also, as I told you all the other names before, but Frank Zappa, when I first heard him, I ended up being about 16 years old, 65 Impala SS with Gregory Peccary, because of you cranking out at my speakers. How did that all begin? How did that relationship begin with Frank?
Actually, before he was famous and before I was famous, I met him. He was starting to play on the Sunset Strip with his mothers before the first album came out. And I was studying at UCLA, and a young lady who is also part of the master's degree program in folk music studies happened to go to the Sunset Strip and heard the mothers and said, you ought to hear these guys. They're great. And this was before I really had that much of an attachment to comedy, because I hadn't started my show yet and made that transition, which happened with the Purple People Eater and all that.
Right.
But she and I were attracted to Frank Zappa's music because he blended so many wonderful things together. He was the guy who would take inspiration both from composers, avant-garde composers like Edgar Varese and, of course, Stravinsky and Bartók, and also, to an equal degree, from street corner doo-wop groups of the 50s. He had a really enviable collection of records that were starting to be worth a lot of money then in the 60s, 45s of early doo-wop music.
Yeah. So one thing I hear all the time is folks that do study music tell me it is the musical genius of Zappa, how he used so much classical music and without us even knowing it.
Right, exactly. So he would make up these songs like Don't Eat the Yellow Snow and Beep Bees and Beer, as I always had to say on the radio, all these titillating tunes that would draw in this audience of brainy 14-year-old boys to his shows. But I think what Frank really wanted to do is to get them hooked on his more complex music. Things in odd key changes, things in odd time signatures, and things that brought in little bits of Stravinsky when you least expected them. Like if you listen to Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, I mean, it's silly lyrics about dog pee, but there's the music behind it is really very complex.
What, being a collector like you are, do you have something really rare from Frank, like an acid pressing of a...
actually,
here it is.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. Well, actually, this is going to be just, I put this together for my talk Sunday night. Sunday night, I'm speaking about the life and music of Frank Zappa. And if you could cue up number 3 on this disc, it's just 1 minute. But what it is from the very first actual record that Frank made that was ever released featuring Frank's playing, and he plays guitar on this, kind of rudimentary compared to what he did later. In addition to everything else Frank did in his music, he was also an ace guitarist, one of the very best of that era or any era. But this is going to be the very first record that Frank ever made. He fell in with some people who owned a little recording studio in Cucamonga, California. There is really such a place, a blue-collar town east of Los Angeles, where Frank happened to be with his family at that time. And he fell in with these people who ran this little garage recording studio, and they would make sides and then try and lease them to larger record companies. And they put out a version of 16 Tons, which was kind of a Duane Eddy wannabe, that record. It wasn't as good as Duane Eddy, but they were trying. Frank isn't on that side. But on the other side, they let him play guitar, and this happened to be the first slice of vinyl that was ever loosed on the public, though hardly anybody bought it, with Frank's music. It's called Break Time. I faded it out because I just wanted to play the part where you hear Frank. You don't hear much of him the rest of the record.
Right.
But,
And you said the guy on piano was...
I think that was Paul Buff who owned the studio. I could
Yeah.
be wrong on that. There are actually 2 guitars on that record, and it was more or less cleared up that both of them are Frank by overdubbed. So,
Very cool.
but anyway, that was how he started, and he only got better and better from there. And I'll play more examples of his early work on Sunday night. Reed College, 7 o'clock in Thalham Lecture Hall. You drive into the main entrance of Reed College, and there's this circle next to the old Elliott Hall, the main classroom building. And another more modern building on that circle is where the Thalham Lecture Hall is. So that's where it is.
So is it one of the best things for you to, on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, just hit an old record store and peruse through there?
Well, I do a little more online perusing today. I'll confess to that. There's really no more room in my place.
I'll bet.
It's full. Yeah.
I've stopped. Could you imagine that day?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have no more room for my habit.
Yes, and I've also I realized there are records here that I will never ever be able to listen to. So
And that's the other thing too now, because I have a collection myself, and I consider it large, but not a tenth of yours. But I find out that when you are short on room, this one really doesn't need to be in here, just to make room for a few more new ones.
yes.
It does. Okay, that's a simple answer. Yeah, that's what happens.
But I actually enjoy hearing music online too.
Yeah.
In fact, let me play something. You
that.
have this queued up. I'm going to play the newest Demented song in my collection. This just came in on an MP3. I think it's also up on YouTube. But it was just performed 2 or 3 days ago by a guy named Haywood Banks, who is quite a popular singing comedian, mostly working the rural areas of Illinois and Michigan. He does Chicago now and then, and Columbus, but he's famous back there. He doesn't tour the country, but he's done a lot of really wonderful songs. And this is very lo-fi production. It's just him playing guitar in front of the camera and the microphone. But this is cold season. A lot of people listening this evening, I'm sure, have recently had colds or are about to get colds. And this is about how Haywood Banks caught his cold.
An itinerant little virus from the sinus of a Shriner that got picked up off the podium and coughed across the diner. Tumbled past the patty melts and pie and kosher dills and got sucked up by the fan that exhausts above the grill, and that's how. That's exactly how I caught my cold.
Yeah.
It wasn't fate or the fact I forgot to wear my hat, I caught my cold. Well, it met up with some mildew and some malingering acidophilus and the greasy, hazy mayonnaise that descends on the metropolis. It bumped into some bacterium with their cilia all a jerky, and they caught the 315 bus to Albuquerque, and that's how. That's exactly how I caught my cold. It wasn't fate or the fact that my feet got wet, I caught my cold. Well, you could go to the doctor, get a shot in the cheek. You say if you don't feel better in 14 days, well, this could last 2 weeks. So get that 12-hour behind-the-counter cold remedy recommended by the folks who bring you methamphetamine. From a doorknob to a forehead to a polytechnic school to a bowling ball remote controlling rented power tool to the dollar in my change when I bought my chicken wings. When I touched my nose, that virus chose that moment to unpack its things. That's how. That's exactly how I caught my cold. It wasn't fact or the fate. I stayed out too late, I caught my cold. It was a moment I said, man, I forgot to wash my hands, I caught my cold. Maybe that'll go.
Haywood Banks is the man's name. He's probably best known for a song called Toast, which he performs with a toaster, on which he bangs on the toaster and shows you all the different musical notes you can get just by banging on an ordinary toaster. But that's his latest, How I Caught My Cold, Haywood Banks.
Excellent. We are live here in the Bing Lounge with Dr. Demento. In fact, we are going to be enjoying his company for about 10, 15 minutes more because the man does have to make a run over to Reed College. He's got to be there soon, so we will be going into the Drive at 5 next with Dr. Demento here in the Bing Lounge.